I studied the wine list while Dad explained to his business partners why I was sitting at their table. Sarah's trying her hand at business consulting. She's very enthusiastic but still learning the ropes. I thought it would be educational for her to observe how real deals get done. We were at Mirabelle, the kind of restaurant where CEOs closed nine-figure deals over $400 bottles of wine. Dad's architecture firm, Bennett and Associates, was celebrating their biggest contract signing, a $85 million commercial development project with Horizon Industries, their largest client in 20 years. "That's generous of you, Tom," said Richard, Dad's senior partner. "Not many fathers would bring their daughter to a client dinner like this." "Well, Sarah keeps talking about her little consulting company," Dad said with that indulgent smile I'd learned to hate. "I figured watching us in action might teach her something about real business development." I sipped my water and checked my phone. 15 minutes until James arrived. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. "Sarah, honey, put the phone away," Mom said from across the table. "This is an important dinner. Show some respect." I put the phone in my purse and smiled politely. Dad's firm had been successful for 30 years. A mid-sized architecture practice specializing in commercial buildings. Respectable work. Solid reputation. Annual revenue around $40 million. He'd built it from nothing and he never let anyone forget it. What he didn't know was that I'd built something bigger. "So Sarah, your father mentioned you started some kind of business?" asked Patricia, Richard's wife. "What exactly do you do?" "Business consulting and strategic advisory," I said simply. Dad laughed. "She helps small businesses with their operations. It's very sweet. She made business cards and everything." "That's wonderful," Patricia said with that tone people use when talking to children. "Everyone has to start somewhere. I'm sure you'll learn a lot as you go." "How long have you been doing this?" Richard asked. "About 5 years." 5 years. Dad's eyebrows rose. "Still at it?" "Sarah, at some point you need to accept that consulting is extremely competitive. Maybe it's time to look at more stable options. I could get you an interview at my firm. We need someone in project coordination." Project coordination. An entry-level position answering phones and scheduling meetings. I had an MBA from Wharton and had built a consulting firm with $520 million in annual revenue. But sure, project coordination sounded great. "I'm happy with what I'm doing," I said. "But are you making money?" Mom asked pointedly. "You're 31 years old, Sarah. You still rent that tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old car. When are you going to start building real security?" The tiny apartment was a penthouse in Pacific Heights that I owned, along with the building. The 10-year-old car was a deliberate choice. I also had a Range Rover and a Porsche in my garage that I rarely drove. But my parents had never visited my place, never asked about my finances, never showed any interest in the details of my life. They'd decided I was struggling and no evidence would convince them otherwise. "Here's the thing about consulting," Richard said, leaning forward like he was sharing profound wisdom. "It's not just about having good ideas. It's about relationships. Networks. Credibility. That takes decades to build. Your father and I have been in business for 30 years. That's why firms like Horizon Industries trust us with major projects." "Exactly," Dad agreed. "Sarah, you can't just hang out a shingle and call yourself a consultant. Real clients want proven track records, established firms, people who understand how serious business works." I'd founded Apex Strategic Solutions 5 years ago with 2 Harvard classmates. We specialized in operational optimization and growth strategy for Fortune 500 companies. Our first client had been a regional retail chain. Our second had been Microsoft. Last year we'd consulted for 43 of the Fortune 500. Our average project fee was $8 million. Our client retention rate was 94%, the highest in the industry. And 6 weeks ago, Horizon Industries had hired us to evaluate their vendor relationships and operational partnerships, including their relationship with Bennett and Associates. "The Horizon deal is a perfect example," Dad was saying. $85 million over 3 years. That's what real business relationships look like. That's the kind of contract that comes from decades of trust and credibility. "How did you land it?" Patricia asked. "We've worked with Horizon for 15 years, Richard explained proudly. Their CEO, James Morrison, personally requested us for this project. Said we were the only firm he trusted with something this significant. I checked my watch. 8 minutes. That's the difference between what we do and what Sarah's attempting, Dad said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone. We have relationships with CEOs of major corporations. Sarah's probably working with mom-and-pop shops, small businesses that can't afford real consulting firms. Nothing wrong with that. Mom added quickly. Everyone starts small. Maybe someday you'll work your way up to bigger clients, sweetie. The waiter appeared with our appetizers. As he set down the plates, I saw movement near the restaurant entrance. James Morrison had arrived, along with Horizon's CFO and Chief Operating Officer. They were heading straight for our table. Tom. Richard. James's voice boomed across the restaurant. He was a tall man in his 50s, commanding presence, the kind of executive who made rooms go quiet when he entered. Dad and Richard stood immediately, shaking hands enthusiastically. James, wonderful timing. Dad said. We were just celebrating the contract signing. Please join us. Actually, I'm here because I need to speak with Ms. Bennett, James said, his expression serious. Sarah, do you have a moment? The table went silent. Of course, I said, standing. Wait, Dad's voice was confused. How do you two know each other? Ms. Bennett is the CEO of Apex Strategic Solutions, James said. We hired her firm 6 weeks ago to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of Horizon's operational partnerships and vendor relationships. I watched the color drain from Dad's face. I'm sorry, what? Richard said weakly. Apex Strategic Solutions has been working with Horizon for the past month and a half, James continued. Their analysis has been extraordinarily thorough. And I'm afraid, Tom, that I need to discuss some of their findings regarding Bennett and Associates. This doesn't make sense, Mom said. Sarah runs a small consulting business. She works with Mrs. Bennett. Your daughter runs a $520 million consulting firm with offices in 7 countries, James said. Apex Strategic Solutions is one of the most respected advisory firms in the world. We're fortunate they took us on as a client. Dad had gone completely pale. Sarah, is this true? Yes, I said simply. James pulled out a document folder. Tom, Richard, perhaps we should speak privately? Sarah, if you could join us. My team is waiting in the private dining room upstairs. What findings? Richard asked, his voice tight with fear. Your contract with Horizon Industries, James said carefully. Apex's analysis revealed some significant issues. Cost overruns that weren't disclosed, timeline delays that were misrepresented, quality control problems that your firm actively concealed. The $85 million contract we signed last week? We're terminating it effective immediately. You can't. Dad said desperately. We have a signed agreement. With termination clauses for material misrepresentation and fraud, I said quietly. Which Apex's investigation documented extensively. You built Horizon for materials you never used. You subcontracted work to unqualified firms while charging premium rates. You falsified inspection reports on the Riverside project. Richard had sat down heavily, his face gray. This is insane, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah, you're my daughter. How could you? I'm a consultant who was hired to analyze Horizon's partnerships, I interrupted. I conducted a thorough, objective investigation. The fact that one of those partnerships was your firm is unfortunate. The fact that your firm engaged in fraudulent billing practices is on you. We need to discuss this, Richard said desperately. James, surely we can work something out. Your firm will be receiving formal notice of contract termination tomorrow, James said coldly, along with a demand for repayment of $12 million in fraudulent charges. If you don't comply, we'll be filing a lawsuit. He turned to me. Sarah, shall we? My team is waiting to finalize our next project scope. I gathered my purse and stood. Every person at the table was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Sarah, wait, Mom said, her voice shaking. What is happening? What is all of this? This is what real business looks like, Mom. What happens when you build credibility based on competence instead of just relationships? What happens when you deliver actual value instead of coasting on reputation? You destroyed my firm. Dad shouted. You're my daughter. Your firm destroyed itself through fraud and incompetence. I just documented it. Dad? I'm not your daughter who's still learning the basics. I'm the CEO of a $500 million consulting firm that advises 43 Fortune 500 companies. I have 280 employees across 7 countries. Last year, Forbes named me one of the top 10 consultants under 40. Why didn't you tell us? Mom whispered. I tried. 5 years ago I invited you to our launch event. You said you were too busy. 3 years ago I sent you a Wall Street Journal article about Apex. You never mentioned it. Last year I won the International Business Strategy Award. You told me it was nice and changed the subject. I looked at each of them, Dad, Mom, Richard, Patricia. All of them staring with identical expressions of shock and disbelief. You decided I was an amateur playing at business. You never asked about my clients, my revenue, my success. You were too invested in believing I was failing to see that I was thriving. But we're your family, Dad said, his voice breaking. You're right. You're my family. That's why I recused myself from making the final recommendation about Bennett and Associates. My team presented the findings to Horizon's board. They made the decision to terminate. I turned to James. Shall we? I believe we're discussing the expansion into Asian markets. After you, he said. We walked away from the table. Behind me I heard Mom crying softly. Dad saying something about, has to be a mistake. Richard frantically making phone calls. In the private dining room upstairs, Horizon's executive team was waiting. We spent 90 minutes discussing their expansion strategy, potential partnerships and operational infrastructure. I presented recommendations that would save them $40 million over 3 years while accelerating their growth timeline. When we finished, James shook my hand. Brilliant work as always, Sarah. The board wants to extend our contract for another year. Are you available? We'll make it work, I said. My phone buzzed continuously in my purse. 17 missed calls from Dad. 23 texts from Mom. 6 voicemails from Richard. I turned it off without listening to any of them. The next morning, industry news sites reported that Horizon Industries had terminated their contract with Bennett and Associates, citing material misrepresentation and fraud. The story mentioned that the decision came after an investigation by Apex Strategic Solutions. My firm received 3 new client inquiries before noon. Companies impressed by our thoroughness and integrity. The publicity, ironically, had been excellent for business. Dad sent an email at 2 p.m. Subject line, please. I opened it. Sarah, your mother is devastated. The firm is facing bankruptcy. Richard is talking about selling his house. This will destroy everything I've built. You're my daughter. Please, there has to be something you can do. Tell Horizon it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we'll fix everything. Please. I read it twice, then replied. Dad, Apex Strategic Solutions conducted an objective investigation and documented fraud. I cannot and will not ask Horizon to ignore criminal behavior. You built your firm on lies and inflated charges. The consequences are yours to face. As for being your daughter, I've been your daughter for 31 years. You never once asked about my business, my success, or my achievements. You introduced me at client dinners as an amateur who was still learning. You dismissed 5 years of extraordinary success because it didn't look like what you understood. You made your choices. These are mine. I hit send before I could reconsider. Mom called an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. Sarah, please. Your father made mistakes, but he's still your father. Family has to come first. You can't let your pride destroy us. Please just talk to Horizon. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. We're begging you. I deleted the message. Richard sent a desperate text. My career is over because of you. I have 3 kids in college. How am I supposed to explain this to them? I blocked his number. 3 weeks later, Bennett and Associates filed for bankruptcy. The local business journal ran a story about their fall, mentioning the Horizon investigation and the subsequent loss of 3 other major clients who'd pulled their contracts out of concern. Dad left one final voicemail. I hope you're happy. 30 years of work gone. Because my daughter chose revenge over family. I'll never forgive you for this. I saved it but didn't respond. People asked if I felt guilty. If the satisfaction of being right was worth destroying my father's company. Family should have mattered more than business. The answer was simple. I didn't destroy Bennett and Associates. Dad did through years of fraud and misrepresentation. I just held up a mirror. And if he'd spent even one of the last 5 years actually asking about my work, actually showing interest in my success, actually treating me as a competent professional instead of an amateur playing pretend, maybe, just maybe, I would have warned him before accepting Horizon as a client. But he didn't. And I didn't owe him that courtesy. 6 months later, Apex Strategic Solutions was named Consulting Firm of the Year by the International Business Association. Standing on stage accepting the award, I thought about that dinner at Mirabelle. About Dad explaining to his partners that I was still learning the basics. I'd learned the basics just fine. I'd also learned that competence doesn't require validation from people too blind to see it. And that sometimes, the sweetest success is the kind that proves everyone wrong.